Good afternoon. My name is Jason Coleman, and I'll be the moderator for this session, which is titled It's All in the Past, Enhancing Research and Historical Studies with Artificial Intelligence. Before we begin, we have a few reminders. We have a code of conduct that we will adhere to for this conference, and I will post the link into chat in just one moment. And there's also an email that you can reach out to if there are any concerns. Please be sure that your microphone is muted. During the question and answer, please wait until you are invited to unmute before asking your question or making your comment, and you may also use chat for questions. This session is being recorded. You can enable captions by clicking on the Show Captions button at the bottom of the screen. Let me go ahead and paste that in to chat. Okay, and it is my pleasure to introduce Fabio Montella. Fabio is an associate professor of history and library services at Suffolk County Community College. He teaches Introduction to College Research and several undergraduate history courses. He is also a published Long Island baseball historian. Fabio holds an MLIS from CW Post, an MA in history from Stony Brook University, and an MA in learning and emerging technology from SUNY Empire State College. Fabio is also a 2020 SUNY Online Teaching Ambassador and a 2021 recipient of the New York State Outstanding Librarian Award. Please join me in welcoming Fabio. And Fabio, take it away.
All right, thank you, Jason, for that introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is well, doing well out there. And I want to thank you for joining us for this presentation. Again, it's all in the past, enhancing research and historical studies with artificial intelligence. And it's really about me and my experience with AI in the college classroom and sort of that journey that I took to become comfortable with it and use it in a beneficial manner for myself and the learning of my students. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, and a thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, thank you. Now, I know Jason gave me an introduction, but I do want to share a little more about myself. As Jason mentioned, I work at Suffolk County Community College. About 14 years now. I've been there as both a librarian and a history professor, and I emphasize the "and" because, well, I've sort of incorporated both of them together. I can't do one without the other at this point. They've just intertwined so much, and rightfully so. So much of history involves research, and so much of the research and history for students, I believe, needs a librarian to sort of guide them along the way. I'm an advocate of technology and instruction, and I emphasize the "and" because I truly believe that the two need to go together, not necessarily 50-50. I think whatever the percentage is up to the educator. Sometimes you might need more technology than instruction, or sometimes vice versa. You find that happy medium for yourself. I believe in traditional and modern teaching methods. Again, I don't stick to one or the other. I think some traditional methods have proven the test of time, so we stick with those. And some modern approaches, I think, need to be infused in there to give us the best quality education. I like dogs and cats. I listen to Metallica and Taylor Swift. And why am I sharing this with you? Well, it's because I have a wide range of likes and interests. And for me, variety and a blended approach often works best, especially in education. And I'm pretty sure Taylor wholeheartedly agrees with that. Now, before I delve into how I utilize AI in my classroom, I'd be remiss if I didn't provide some background or history as to how this all came about. So I want to briefly give you a sort of a past, present, and future of this journey and how it all came about. And let's start with the past. For several semesters, I always assign my students a traditional research paper assignment. And by traditional, it's a very common assignment that many professors give. Students choose their topic and question. We ask that they use scholarly sources. We ask that they cite their sources. My paper was about 4 to 5 pages. I emphasize the importance of using the library, using the writing center, and I give them a due date of the last day of the semester. So basically, you have your due date, you have your assignment, just get it done and get it back to me at the end of the semester. Well, I quickly found out as a new professor in history that this just wasn't working well. I just wasn't happy with the results, poor writing, poor research, poor citation, and poor grades. So obviously I knew something needed to be done. So I had to scrap this sort of traditional research paper assignment. And I presented something more revised, if you will, for my present assignment. Now, if this revised research paper assignment looks a lot like my previous or traditional research paper assignment, it's because it is. It's exactly the same structure. The only difference is I included a weekly scaffolded process. In other words, I told my students, we're going to do this together. Week by week, we're going to take a section of this research paper assignment, work on it in class, chip away at it, and by the end of the semester, you will have a completed paper that you can submit to me then as something we've all worked on together. And in order to do this, I had to introduce something that I call dispersed instruction. Now, we meet about twice a week, so I would take 15 to 20 minutes of class time where we would go over that week's step or that week's portion of the research paper assignment, and I would introduce, or rather I embedded a librarian into this process, which was very key to me. In order to do this dispersed instruction and make it successful, I needed the help of a librarian at every step of this. So again, between the 15, 20 minutes of class time and assigned homework assignments, we started to chip away at the assignment, the grand assignment of the research paper, and give the students more of a scaffolded approach. And here we have sort of a week 1 through week 16 breakdown. Again, this is very fluid. I changed it over the semesters. But by week 1, I made students aware of the course format. I made them aware that we would have a librarian working with us, and we would be working on this research paper in sections. By week 3, we're looking at finding a topic and a question, because believe it or not, students, even with something like that, they need scaffolded help on how to create or formulate a viable question. Week 5, we're looking at library resources, then diverse voices, and so forth, till we get to weeks 14 through 16, where they're actually constructing and connecting all the information that they got into a formidable paper. This process to me worked very well. For several semesters, I start to see improvement in grades, an improvement in research, an improvement in citation, and just an overall improvement in students' research abilities. So to me, again, that was a success. And right when I feel comfortable with this assignment and everything seems to be a great success, we have the introduction of artificial intelligence. Kind of came out of nowhere, took us all by surprise. And even with that prolonged instruction, I start to receive papers from students that were written by AI, no citations, lacking sources, lacking any type of dialogue that really flowed with everything. And not to sugarcoat it, I did not like artificial intelligence. I became very much disillusioned with it. And it was something that I felt I had to eliminate from my course. So what do I do now? My past assignment, if we look to the left, obviously didn't work. I had to scrap that approach. The present assignment worked very well. I had great results that I was very happy with, and has continued for several semesters. But in my own words, it was ruined by AI. I know that sounds a little harsh, but that's exactly how I felt at the time. I felt that AI came out, whoever created all of this, ruined what was at this time a very well approach for students to understand research and writing. So for my future assignment, I needed to make some changes. I had to sit down, think it over, and really come out with an answer. And the first thing I told myself is don't reinvent the wheel. The present assignment worked very well, right? The prolonged instruction that I included with the embedded librarian was a great success. I didn't want to get rid of that. Scaffolding works. I didn't want to remove that. I wanted to keep that within the course. I told myself I had to find a way to eliminate AI. And again, this sounds like very harsh language, but at the time, I just couldn't think of any way to sort of get back on track with students. AI to me, I guess my head was sort of clouded with what happened. I didn't see it as a tool or any type of potential within education. But over time, I spoke with colleagues. I did some research. I cleared my head and I sat down. And I realized that eliminating AI was ridiculous. It's just not the approach that I needed, or the approach that anyone should really take with AI. I had to find a way to work with AI. And in order to work with AI, I had to ask myself, how can AI help? How can it help me as an instructor? How can it help my students as learners? And the best way to gain this answer for me was through backwards design. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with backward design, you take your end result, and again, I'm sort of paraphrasing here, take your end result and you work backwards to the steps that would lead up to it. So I knew my end result obviously was my learning objectives for the history paper. Formulate a viable historical research question, locate a diverse and scholarly sources, evaluate historical information, and author a college level research paper. So that's what I wanted my students to attain from this course and from the assignment. And for me, again, I didn't want to change the prolonged instruction. I just had to find a way to include AI in as many of these steps as possible. Now, I wasn't incorporating AI for the sake of just incorporating it. I needed, again, to find a way to facilitate the learning of my students. By including AI in several of these steps, I had to ensure that that process was facilitating the attainment of those learning objectives or those assignments during that week. And again, this took some time. I had to sit down. I spoke with several colleagues to get their opinions on this. And I came up with this. Week one, I had to give my students a what's up. In other words, from day one of the class, I informed them that we had an artificial intelligence-led research assignment. So from day one, made them aware that AI will play a part in this course and would also play a part in the largest assignment that we have in this class, which is the research paper assignment. Inform them that it is a semester-long process. It's going to be broken down into specific steps. And of course, we will work together on each step as a group with an embedded librarian. By week three, librarian really sort of introduces herself, and she comes in to help them formulate their research questions. Now, this is probably the only step of the course where AI didn't really come into effect. It was mostly the introduction for the librarian and their first step into the research paper process. So the librarian would come in and make sure their question wasn't too broad, wasn't too specific, wasn't assuming, is your question valid? And believe it or not, it sounds like a simple step, but it was really one of those steps that I think working with a librarian helped me the most because it allowed them to come up with their own questions. One particular example, we had this one student who was a great student, but just couldn't think of anything to write about historically. And I remember the librarian asked her, oh, well, what are your interests? What do you like to do? And she said, I like to hang out with my friends. And librarian thought for a moment and said, well, you've ever considered what that was like in colonial times? How did people socialize? How did they interact with friends? And she came up with a very viable question of what was socialization like during colonial America. So again, there was just one example of the librarian sort of introducing herself and get the ball rolling on this. Now, by week five, we looked at understanding artificial intelligence. I didn't want the students to use it until we had a discussion with the librarian and the class that was more in depth of AI. Obviously, we started off with what is AI? You can't assume that everybody in class knows what it is or how it works. So we gave a brief explanation of that. We talked about how do we use it ethically and beneficially? How can we use it in this particular history class? And then we gave them a demonstration. Now, not exactly, we didn't have them using it just yet, but the librarian and I demonstrated the use of AI with several questions in front of the students, and then we opened it up to discussions and questions that they may have. And believe it or not, there were a lot of questions, probably more so than I would have considered, as to what AI was and how it should be used and how it would reach inside and outside of this class. By week six is really when we had our students delve into AI and using it. We provided some sample questions, both broad and specific historical questions, and we had the students plug them into AI and get results. We did the search as a class, so we were all searching for identical questions. And then after the search was done, we opened that up to discussion and feedback. And the feedback portion, I think, was very interesting because some students, believe it or not, were not fans of AI right off the bat. They thought it was something that was a little too advanced for what they wanted to do. But I think the discussion and the feedback was very good. We opened it up to a Q&A. And then after all that was done, after the sample questions were put in, we had them put in their own questions. Now, if you remember in week three, they came up with their research questions. So now they were going to look for answers to that. And we had the students put in the questions several times just to emphasize that AI would often shoot back different iterations of those answers. And then the final thing they had to do was save their results. So when they felt comfortable with whatever answers AI gave them, we had them print it out and save them, do nothing else with them. They could quickly browse through them, but don't dissect it, don't evaluate it, just print it and save it. After that, kind of wanted them to step away a little bit, decompress, right? Because they were talking about AI, now they're using it. It's a lot for some of these students to take on all at once. So spring break rolls around, no assignments that week, just go surf with your dog or whatever it is you want to do. And then when we're back from spring break, we start to analyze their AI results. So we're asking the students 15 to 20 minutes in class, read through what AI gave you. And as an assignment, both in class and at home, we ask them to highlight the following: key points and answers, interesting facts, questionable information, points of confusion, points of curiosity, and points of expansion. Now, this is actually a very hefty assignment to do both in class and at home. So this is really, again, where having that librarian with me helped a lot. We sort of split up the class, and then we brought them all together, and the two of us stood up front tackling any answers or questions that they may have. By week 10, we introduced discussions. And this is where we wanted the students to discuss with us what it is that they highlighted from their answers. All that information that they thought was either curious, questionable, needed to be expanded on. We wanted to discuss with them why they chose that and how they were going to move forward in trying to expand on that. So I gave them class time with the instructor and class time with the librarian. So again, those 15 to 20 minutes was sort of an open discussion. Who wants to share what they highlighted, or who wants to, bring this forward and maybe discuss it as a class? If they didn't want to talk about it in front of the class, we offered office time with the instructor or schedule a time with the librarian. Some students felt that they didn't need time to talk with us. They highlighted they were ready to go, but we did provide extra credit for the discussions because we really did want them to speak with us about what it is they were evaluating and looking for in their AI information. By week 11, they had a very important assignment, and that is finding and annotating sources. So after the librarian gave a demonstration of the library's resources and databases, we wanted them to look at what they highlighted the prior week and find books, articles, videos, primary sources, basically any form of information that addresses that. Find information that addresses the points you highlighted. Of course, the library instruction was there as well to help them locate these sources to match those points. And then once they locate those sources, I asked them to annotate 3 of their sources. Again, it could be a book, an article, whatever it is that they choose, but their annotation was 3 parts. The first part was a summary of the source, 1 or 2 sentences telling us what your source is about. The second part, tell us what has your source informed you about that maybe AI did not. And then third, how did this compare, relate, contrast, or add to your AI results? So the annotation, again, is really sort of a way for them to compare what they found with what AI was giving them and hopefully further along that research. By week 12, we had them citing their sources and, of course, citing AI. This was nice for me because I got to step back and have the librarian sort of take over here. She helped them with their in-text and reference citations, both AI and their own sources. And they also had a very, to me, very in-depth conversation about the increased importance of citations in this era of AI. So I was really appreciative of that. By week 13, I wanted them to look for primary sources and local histories. For primary sources, I wanted to know, did their AI results reference primary sources? You might think that AI doesn't really do that, but even if they mention the Constitution, they're referencing a primary source, right? If yes, locate that primary source. If your AI results don't reference a primary source, hey, go out and find one. Find one that could really build upon what AI is giving you. For local history, same thing. Does AI reference any local histories that might pertain to your question or topic? If yes, locate that local history source. If not, go out there and find some. And of course, Penny, who is the librarian that was embedded in this course, was with them from day 1 all the way up until this. Weeks 13 through 15 is when they start writing their research paper. And their research paper was a little different. I did provide them with an instruction sheet that gave them MLA format guidelines, page lengths, all of that information. They were able to revise their research question if their journey sort of dictated that. So for example, I had one student who was looking at the role of women during World War II, and she really went down a pigeonhole on the role of African-American women during World War II. So I said, yeah, that's fine to sort of revise and tweak that question, but I didn't want them to switch their questions completely. So I asked that they please bring that forward to me. And then also, when they wrote their research paper, I wanted it to be a two-part paper. The first part was what we called according to AI, and they told me the research that they found through AI. And the second half was according to my research, which they wrote about, of course, the sources that they found to sort of connect with what AI was giving them. And then the conclusion, I said you could either tie it all together or do like a compare and contrast if you'd like. Penny was there for this as well. I'm still here providing scaffolded approach. And of course, I introduced the Writing Center to them, which became a very beneficial resource. And then week 16, I just provided them with a one-page reflection paper. Describe your experience using AI and traditional research together. Consider its use in this context. Consider its use in other contexts, the good, the bad, the surprising, etc. And of course, we open that up to discussions as well. Penny, myself, and the Writing Center were all resources that were still available for this. So that was the end of that prolonged instruction. Class was dismissed. And I was very, very pleased, being that this was sort of a piloted approach for me with the results that I was getting. Not just the papers, but the research, the citations, and even so much so the discussions, I thought really sort of opened up the eyes of Penny and myself, but also the students. Now, if you're like me and you go to Costco or any place that they're providing samples, I'm not going to buy a big bag until I sample something. So I don't think it's only fair that I give you a sample of what this prolonged instruction was like. And to do so, I'm going to use one of my students' submissions. We'll just call her Ruby. I'm not going to obviously give her last name. But for step one, research topics and questions, she came up with a very interesting question. What is the American eugenics movement and what were its effects on the world stage? Kind of advanced, in my opinion, for somebody in a community college introductory class, but I loved her approach here. So I said, approved. Let's move forward with this. So step two, I wanted class to understand artificial intelligence. That's where we had our class discussion and demonstration. Some of the questions we got was, why more research? If AI is giving us the answers, why do we need to do more research on our own? Which is a valid question, which we addressed. I got a lot of questions about how AI works. Some of them thought it was sorcery. So we had a little discussion as to how this whole crazy phenomenon is put together. A lot of comments of this is crazy. They couldn't believe just how quickly and effectively these answers were being popped out of artificial intelligence. And then, of course, I also got questions of, can I use this in my other classes, which opened up a whole nother discussion. By week 3, we start using artificial intelligence. So now Ruby plugs her research question of what is the American eugenics movement and its impact on the world stage into AI. And she got some really good results. A lot of information here, as you can see. This is just a screenshot. I don't want to get into the historical terminology here, but she did get some very good information. And by step 4, I asked her to analyze her results. And as you can see, Ruby went very, very highlighter crazy. She even put a little sort of a page up front about yellow being details to investigate and the blue being the main definition that AI gave her. Again, she did highlight a lot, probably more than I would have expected. But hey, that's just going to lead to more research, right? So when we got to the discussion, I'm just going to go over some of what it is we talked about. The very top, she puts a note of wording of control versus eliminate. And AI writes that the American eugenics movement aims to improve the human species by controlling reproduction to increase desirable heritable traits while reducing undesirable ones. And she wanted to know the use of the word control versus eliminate because her knowledge of eugenics tended to eliminate races. I think she was thinking more of like the Holocaust, as opposed to the word control. A few more sections as she puts the word expand, expand, expand. She wanted to further build on what they were telling her. And then at the bottom, there's a sentence there that reads, These policies disproportionately targeted marginalized groups, including people of color, the poor, immigrants, and individuals with disabilities. And she wanted examples of that, which is fine because, again, it's going to get her to really dig deeper into this. And then AI gave her some bulleted points that talked about domestic impact, immigration restrictions, international influence, and legacy. And she provided even more of her little bullet points here. For domestic impacts, they write many states in the US enacted laws permitting the forced sterilization of individuals deemed unfit or feeble-minded. Well, first thing she writes, if you look at the very top, is what states. She does say many states, but she wanted to know the specific states that she could sort of delve into. And also, what were these laws and who passed them? So again, just a lot of critical thinking here going on from Ruby. Then she talks about breaking it down further. And then for international influence, they talk about how America influenced Germany, Sweden, and Brazil. Now, Ruby's and a lot of students are very familiar with Germany's eugenics movement and the Holocaust, but she put Sweden and Brazil with a question mark, which tells me that she was going to dig deeper into those two nations. And then for the Nazi Holocaust, if you see the little arrow at the bottom, she writes primary sources. She's thinking ahead, saying, I'm going to find some primary sources that look at the Nazi Holocaust. Step 6, Ruby was asked to find and annotate sources with a librarian, and she finds a source, excuse me, from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. What were some of the similarities between racism in Nazi Germany and the United States 1920s through 1940s? And she writes for her annotation, the Immigration Act of 1924 was described in the ChatGPT summary, discussing how certain immigrants were favored in the US while others were severely limited. This source further dives into what that law really did to American and German immigrants, as the similarities were brought up only once in the summary. The mention of this one piece of legislation opened a door to the cruel path it created for other legal and idealistic similarities like the US Indian race laws and so forth. So again, she's using this to expand on that mention of the Immigration Act of 1924. For step 7 with the citations, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I just kind of sat back and had Penny, the librarian, sort of take over here, helping students with citation, and she did a wonderful job with that. For step 8, local histories and primary sources, she worked closely with Penny, and she found this local history, which talks about Charles Davenport, a major player in the American eugenics movement, speaking to the Huntington Rotarian Club. Now, Rotarians are known for their great work and their sort of desire to help the communities. But in this local paper, they talk about how they brought in Mr. Davenport to talk about his eugenics laboratory work. So there might have been some interest there. And then for a primary source, she finds this, I think, just fantastic primary source of Harry Laughlin's honorary doctorate from the University of Heidelberg. Harry Laughlin was another major player in the American eugenics movement, and the University of Heidelberg was a major university in Germany practicing eugenics during that period of Nazi Germany. And they awarded him an honorary doctorate for his science and race hygiene work. And he's in this letter, he's thanking them for giving him that honorary doctorate. And now we get to step 9, which is the writing of the research paper. And I'm not going to show you the whole paper. Obviously, it was a fantastic paper that Ruby wrote. But for the first part, according to AI, the pseudoscientific eugenics movement gained significant traction in the US compared to other nations due to the biases built into its foundation. It further dives into the consequences, both domestically and internationally, of eugenics regarding its domestic impact, immigration restrictions, international influence, and legacy of the United States. And then when she talks about her own research, according to my research, the American eugenics movement not only altered the institutions that made up the United States, but had rippling effects across the world even before eugenics became a word. With AI being a catalyst for my research, I was able to expand on ideas summarized by my question, what is the American eugenics movement and its effects on the world stage? It helped me find examples of laws such as the US and other nations like Germany enforcing such restrictions on feeble-minded individuals who was considered feeble-minded, and led me down a rabbit hole I was unaware of before this project. And for her reflection paper, she writes, I found this project very interesting, as each time I asked AI my research question, it gave me a new answer, or rather a new perspective to look at. AI gave me information I hadn't considered before regarding the topic of American eugenics. For example, I did not think to investigate how or if Sweden and Brazil adopted racial hygienic ideologies seen in Nazi Germany. I also enjoyed seeing what I already knew being articulated in ways I hadn't realized could support my research question. So with that, I hope you all have an idea of what this journey has been like for me and some of the journeys of my students. So I thank you, and I now open it up to questions.
All right, thank you. That was fascinating.
Thank
I
you.
wish I was a student in your class. We have one question that's come in during your talk, and that was, what AI tools were your students using?
They were doing the basic, a lot of them use ChatGPT. It was just an answer, ChatGPT answer question type tool.
And feel free to enter your questions in chat, or you can raise your hand, I think, hopefully, and we can allow you to talk. And I'm going to check the Q&A as well. So any of those methods. Okay, we have a question in Q&A. Vanessa says, wow, thank you. Students must have really appreciated the structure of this lesson. How much emphasis was placed on the process versus the content?
So that's a great question, and one that I had to sort of think back or sit back rather and contemplate. I wanted them to become familiar with AI because I knew that it was going to be a major player going forward. So much so that I was able to withdraw some of the content's value of it because I wanted them to sort of learn the tool, which I knew eventually was going to become so much secondhand to them that the content would always rise to the top afterwards. But to answer your question, I think I put a little more emphasis on structure and the use of AI rather than the content, because it was something that they were doing on their own, and the research part of it, I think, would eventually come during their course in the academic college.
Okay, we have a question from Michael. Have you thought about using other large language models besides ChatGPT?
I have, and mind you, this is my first semester piloting this sort of approach, and I didn't want to use too many and have students feel a little overwhelmed. So I did give them the option to use something they were familiar with. A lot of them chose ChatGPT, and for those students that had never really used AI, I said, let's stick with this. That way we have more of a uniform approach in the class. But moving forward, which undoubtedly I know students are going to become more and more familiar with AI, I'm going to open it up to more of those.
Pamela asks, what challenges came up? Were there times when the students struggled or the AI confused them?
The AI didn't so much confuse them. I think most of the work or the confusion that required a great deal of help from librarian was analyzing their sources. They didn't know what points to pull out or what to expand on. I felt a lot of them were just highlighting every sentence. And so I think with the work of Penny and even the Writing Center, we had them sort of understand how to read what AI was giving them and try to pull out some of those main points or the key points of their topic and their question. So I think that was probably the biggest challenge. But when it came to getting those points and finding information, which I thought was going to be the biggest challenge, they were able to find so many sources to sort of build upon what AI gave them.
Lisa says, this is wonderful. As a librarian, I commend your collaboration with your librarian. How did you address the ethics of using technology that has so many ethical issues, such as its use of work without permission and sources that include misinformation and biases? Did you and the librarian offer alternatives to generative AI?
We didn't offer alternatives. We always thought that the alternative would be their information, what they were finding. And I think the discussion part when we introduced AI really talked about the ethics of it. And I did mention that AI has been a problem, not just in this university, but others. And I told them that this process was tried to get them to use it ethically and understand it. And I think with that discussion and with this process in place, the specific steps, in my opinion, eliminated a lot of those unethical approaches. Are some going to rise in the future? I would assume so, but at this point, I think this was built specifically to try and give them a pre-built ethical approach, if that makes sense.
Hence commented in chat that this approach seems like it would work well in a high school context.
Absolutely, I think it would too. I think a lot of what we did in this class, it's an introduction to modern American history. A lot of my students were actually from high school, and they were sort of the AP classes, and it was very similar. A lot of it blends, but yeah, absolutely, I think it would work very well as well.
Okay, and Vanessa asked, one follow-up, would you consider this as possible in an asynchronous class?
I hadn't thought about that. I don't think it would transition seamlessly. I think it would take a little more work. So I'm perhaps sitting down with the librarian again and seeing what we need to iron out. But short answer, yes, with some minor work to be done.
Okay, that's all the questions that have come in so far. We have, looks like about 6 minutes left. If any of you have additional questions, don't be shy. Okay, here's some more. Okay, great. Alan asks why you chose MLA instead of Chicago.
That's a great question. This is even before AI. I know a lot of history professors, and especially at my university, my institution rather, were leaning towards Chicago, and I felt a lot of students were putting more work into understanding Chicago and formatting it, and they were sort of delving away from the actual research process. With MLA, I feel like they grasp it a little easier, and they use it in a lot of their other classes, so they're not trying to learn two things rather than one, and it really put the emphasis on the research, the information, and the evaluation and understanding of what was being said. So yeah, that was basically the reason for that.
Okay. Jennifer asks, getting intro level students to think critically about the information in primary and secondary sources can be a challenge. Did you find that they were more or less open to critiquing AI?
Can you repeat that question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. Getting intro level students to think critically about the information in primary and secondary sources can be a challenge. Did you find that they were more or less open to critiquing AI?
I think they were fairly open to it. I think without the help of a librarian sort of over their shoulder helping them with the critique, they might not have been that open to it. When we did the demonstration, we had to sort of pull back a little bit because they said this is an amazing tool. It's giving us all the answers. And we really had to say, well, this is where you need to open your minds and start to critique. So we sort of had to scaffold them along the way, if you will. But once that happened and you sort of demonstrated and opened their eyes to it, I think they were very open, as you can see with Ruby, to sometimes possibly over critiquing what AI was giving them, which I had no qualms with as long as they were digging deeper into what it is they were critiquing.
Lisa made a comment to Ken, who had asked about possibility of using it in high school. And she said, my colleagues and I used a very similar model in high school before ChatGPT. So I really like how they included the reflective element with AI as well as the process. And Nancy asked, did anyone run into the problem of hallucinated citations? That is, sources that looked good but didn't really exist.
Are you talking about when they were looking for their own sources?
I think if ChatGPT gave them suggestions of sources, which.
Oh yeah, no. With that, we told them not to look so much for the sources because part of the discussion was letting them know how one of the problems with AI was that citations aren't 100% accurate or where they need to be at this moment. So we sort of took that out of the equation and said, just look at the information that they're giving you.
Michael asks if you would be willing to share your slides.
Absolutely.
And I think they may, I'm not sure if they'll be posted on the conference's website or not. Does anybody know if Bree mentioned that during the opening session? I didn't attend that. And then, okay. All right. Is there Fabio, is there a good way for people to contact you if they would like the slides?
Yeah, let me just put my email address into the chat. And they're also, yeah.
And we have another question from Marcia. Do your students use tools such as Zotero?
Some of them do. We don't make it a requirement, but some of the more outgoing, not outgoing, the more overachieving students like to use those. But no, we don't require it, in other words, but a lot of them will use it.
Okay, we have time for maybe one more question if anyone has one final question.
And if I can make just one final comment, I did also notice that using the AI in the class really engaged them more with the research than just looking up their own information. So the engagement factor, I think, went up considerably.
Okay, well, I don't see any more questions, but a lot of people are thanking you in the chat, and
Well, thank you all for being here. I appreciate sharing this with all of you.
I thank you as well. It's really fascinating.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you.